This week on London Real, we have the psychotherapist and international best-selling author, Esther Perel.
Treat your partner the way you treat your client, with the same charm, the same seductiveness, the same humor, the same kindness, and you will have a great marriage. Desire needs space, difference, otherness, a bridge to cross, somebody to conquer.
You said that the quality of your life is determined by the quality of your relationships.
The millennial generation are the children of the divorced. Romantic ideal, it's all about I have my partner and I am the one. It would be easy to say, obviously people have affairs because they don't like their partner and because they have miserable relationships. No, if they do, they actually divorce these days. If they have affairs, it's because the relationship is good enough for many other things.
London Real presents Esther Perel, Sex and Infidelity.
That the bonds of wedlock are so heavy that it takes two to carry and sometimes three.
London Real presents a gathering of the greatest minds in the history of our show, announcing a 3-day transformational experience live in London. Become part of the conversation. Challenge yourself. Upgrade your peer group. Change your game.
What if you could be part of an elite network of individuals looking to significantly improve their business and personal lives? A place where you will meet future investors, collaborators, mentors, and allies. Learn from the best in the world how to scale your business, build your network, publish your book, and take your game to the next level. London Real Masterminds.
Featuring an all-star lineup, including Elliot Hulse, Peter Joseph, Jeff Thompson, Mike Dolce, Chris Eubank, Tucker Max, Alex Icon, and many more.
All battling it out in a 20-minute TED Talk style format for a $20,000 prize. Watch the speakers compete, network with an extraordinary group of professionals, and interact in roundtable discussions with our most famous London Real guests ever. It all happens at London Real Masterminds over 3 days at the 5-star Langham Hotel in London. But this isn't just an experience. It's a 1-year membership into an elite network of London Reelers that will become your future business partners, mentors, investors, and biggest supporters.
Challenge yourself. Upgrade your peer group. Change your game. Become real. London Real, sponsored by Bulletproof.
This week on London Real, we have Esther Perel, who is a psychotherapist and relationship expert. You might know her for her 8 million views plus on her 2 TED Talks. One is called The Secret to Desire in a Long-Term Relationship, and the other one is called Rethinking Infidelity. She's a fascinating woman with a really interesting vibe and thought when it comes to a lot of the things we thought were true about relationships, about your own sexuality, about feminism, about as men, how we have to deal with the world. And I really find her views just very new, very refreshing, and I think you'll like to lock in and find out what it's like to be her. She's in super high demand. She said when she gave her second TED Talk, she had Bill Gates in the front row and Al Gore in the front row, and so her success secrets are definitely something to check out. So you can watch this full episode for free with no pop-ups or anything on the London Real Academy. You can just click on the link above and sign in with your social and you're good to go. Also on the Academy, if you want to find out more about her with her success secrets, or watch a show like this live, or get in touch with the activity feed and the amazing social network we have, Join as a member. It's easy. There's a 30-day risk-free money-back guarantee, so there's no reason not to. I would love to see you over there. And I've also just announced a new price point for our London Real Masterminds event, September 25th to 27th. And it's really for people that are looking for a more affordable option. And it's our event-only 2-day pass. It's at a fantastic price, and you can find out more about it by clicking on the link below. It's londonreal.tv/masterminds. It's got the warrior workouts, it's got the TED Talks, the fireside chats, the group lunches, the industry workshops, and everything you would want happening. I'm so excited. I was today spending time with Chris Eubank, the world championship boxer. He's so excited to be there to give his talk and to really get down and teach you about character and integrity. And he's going to be there with Elliot Hulse, with Mike Dolce, with Jeff Thompson. The list goes on. So please join us. Click on the link below, submit your application, and I can't wait to see you there September 25th to 27th.
London Real Academy. Build the best you.
When I go in and look at a person or a business, I want to hear him talk about his dreams.
Am I living in alignment to the way I want to be living? And there's a feeling you get if you're not.
A community of action-oriented people that will keep you accountable to your goals. Sign up now for a free 30-day trial. London Real Set Design by Timothy Olton.
This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is psychotherapist Esther Perel, who is one of the world's leading experts in relationships, couples, sexuality, and the paradoxes besetting modern marriage. Your 2 TED Talks titled The Secret to Desire in a Long-Term Relationship and your most recent, Rethinking Infidelity, a talk for anyone who has ever loved, have 8 million combined views, and they keep going up. You've been profiled by the New York Times and the New Yorker. Your book, Mating in Captivity, is an international bestseller that's been published in 24 different languages. And on top of that, I think you're pretty cool too, Esther. Welcome to London Real.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. No New Yorker yet.
No New Yorker yet. Okay, so New York Times twice, right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, we'll wait for them to come. I want to talk about relationships and sexuality because, quite frankly, we don't really talk about that enough on London Real. And so I'm really curious to jump in. We've got all sorts of things to talk about. But before we do that and talk about your book and your TED Talks, I just wanted to hear a little bit more about you. You're from Belgium. You speak 9 different languages. You grew up in a community of Holocaust survivors that you said comprised 2 different groups, those who did not die and those who came back to life, which I think your parents were included in that group. I was just wondering if you could maybe take us back to then and talk about how you grew up and what that was like.
You know, it's interesting when you are talking about subjects that often are considered on the forefront or the vanguard or the cutting edge of cultural thinking. It's difficult for people to imagine that I may have grown up in a very traditional background, but that's exactly it. I grew up above a store that my parents owned, a clothing store. I worked in the store since I could talk. I was the Jewish family in the neighborhood, and it was the refugee family, and it was the family with the accent. And everybody knows that image. It doesn't really make such a difference where the refugee is from. We know the foreigner on the block. So I have always had a keen awareness of sameness and difference. And I'm sure, without having to break it apart, that that is a piece of what made me become a cross-cultural psychologist that looks at the intersection of relationships, family life, couples relations, and cultural changes. My parents were indeed Polish Holocaust survivors, and they arrived by fluke to Belgium. And I grew up in Antwerp, so we were Flemish-speaking, we were French-speaking, we were German-speaking, Yiddish-speaking, and Polish. We had 5 in the house. And then the rest I picked up, you know, on the road, at school, horizontally.
So your father and mother were the only survivors in their family, is that true?
Both my father comes from a family of 9. My mother had 7 siblings, and both of them were the sole survivors. And they met on the day of liberation as they came out of the concentration camps, and they arrived to Belgium by chance. And then they only had permits for 3 months. They came because my father had helped someone in the camps who was also from Belgium and kind of gave him a false address and a way of coming there. And then basically they were supposed to leave after 3 months, which they did not do. And so they stayed as illegal refugees actually for another 5 years.
Wow.
And only then did they become legalized and did they start to live above board. But this precedes me. This was the life of my brother more than mine.
I saw a video from a few years ago when you said that when you were younger they used to talk just openly and frankly about what happened. That person died, that person was gassed, and it was just something that was always spoken frankly since you were a little girl.
Look, there were different kinds of families. There were families that were very silent about what had happened, and there were families who spoke. But among the speakers, there were those who had victimization stories, and there were those who had heroic stories. And of course, it's not always so clear-cut, but let's say that my family was definitely into the heroic stories. So it was about how they survived, how they managed, how they conned, how they were able to, bypass this one and be lucky here and almost die there. And it was really a heroic tale of how they had come to where they were. And yes, in that sense, there was no taboo around, why don't I have grandparents? Because they were gassed. Why do these people have numbers? Because they were in Auschwitz. I mean, it was a bit of a... what I've often said is that my parents had very little sense of child development. It was like, truth was spoken without necessarily thinking, oh, this is a 5-year-old asking or this is a 10-year-old asking. You just were meant to absorb the truths of the world. So there was very little naivete in that sense. You knew what can happen, and you were living with both ends. You lived with the sense of dread about what can happen, and you lived with the sense that you had to take full advantage of life because of what can happen.
Right, and you saw the people that would live scared and some people that would live more bold, and they were just making a choice about how they dealt with circumstances from the past.
I think that in response to trauma, this is not specific, I would say, to survivors of the Holocaust, but I think generally, we are all today talking about grit, resilience, strength. These concepts have permeated everywhere. Why is it that one set of circumstances knocks one person down and becomes the resource with which another person builds themselves up? And what is the difference between people who, after extreme experiences, basically survive because they're not dead, versus those who are alive and come back to life? And what does it mean? When you survive, you live very close to the ground, you are often suspicious, you don't trust, the world's a dangerous place, and you cannot leave the base. Because in order to leave the base, like a child who leaves the lap of the parents, you need to feel safe enough that there is a base to come back to in order to go and to take risks and be creative and be playful. All these experiences, or be an entrepreneur, all these risk-driven experiences require you to be able to deal with the unknown, because all of them have an element of uncertainty. If you are too afraid of the unknown and all what you try to do is protect yourself from it, you cannot go out in the world and do all those things. On the other side, if you understand how to create an antidote to death, how you actually use this very same thing, how you maintain yourself alive in the face of adversity, that's when you enter into the continuum of resilience. To experience pleasure, you cannot be worried. It just don't go together. You cannot be at the same time anxious and vigilant and experience pleasure. Pleasure comes with an element of freedom and unself-consciousness, a surrender. And that surrender you can only do when you have a modicum of trust in the world, in yourself, and in the people around you.
And that's how, so when people have that trauma, they need to get that trust back before they can then go venture more, take more risks. And some people never do.
And some people never do. But even the ones who take the risks don't necessarily believe that there is no danger, but they manage to insulate it enough so that it doesn't control them, and they can go and bifurcate it and enter the world and do. And loads of survivors did extremely well in the community of my parents. I mean, you know, they became major business people, major real estate developers, because it was, and you could almost see it as the continuum between the victimized and the heroic. You know, those who, in a way, if you have been able to survive 4 or 5 years in a concentration camp, you're an entrepreneur. Let's put it like that. It's a different way of looking at it, but you have managed the most unconventional situations.
I never thought of that way. And so then maybe this ultimate frankness of you as a child and also being kind of the outsider and the immigrant, do you think that's translated into your work? I mean, you're really frank about the way you look at situations, and I think people really find that refreshing because you go right in, both your TED Talks, you're like, let's talk about this.
I'll tell you where I think that my background probably does influence me, is that I am a person who, when I see certainties, when I see truths, which are basically constructs, when I see rigid patterns, I question them. When I see a certain way that people think this is how it has to be, anything that could resemble fascism or authoritarianism, rigid structures that don't make room for freedom, for questioning, for challenging the authority, for what today people love to call disruption, that's where I enter. But I did it long before the word disruption ever came to be. It was a kind of a mentality that you know, things could happen because authoritarian systems were ruling. And an authoritarian system can be a school, it can be your parents, it can be a cultural framework, it can be the romantic ideal, it can be, you know, set gender roles. I mean, it's the rigidity that defines it, it's not the particular content. And wherever I see stuff that sits there like that, I tend to say, is it really like that? Is this because we just have come to agree with it because it's convenient, maybe more than true? And that, I'm kind of attracted to that sometimes. And I don't mean to be a provocateur and a disruptor, but I think on some level there is a piece of agent provocateur in me, mostly because I think that it creates blind spots. It's linked to discrimination, it's linked to racism, it's linked to judgmentalness, it's linked to narrowness. And those are all things which I like to unpack.
Okay. And I want to talk about some of those. I mean, I was scribbling notes when I was watching both your TED Talks recently because you're hitting people with these paradoxes of marriage is this, but now it used to be a village and now it's twice as long as we thought it was, and we're putting all this pressure on one mate. And I want to get into that stuff. But I also want to ask, you said that the quality of your life is determined by the quality of your relationships, which sounds like a simple concept, but it sounds like one that we don't necessarily even acknowledge on a day-to-day basis. We talk about income levels or, you know, starvation or all these other issues, but I don't think people really think about really just the net sum of the relationships in their life. How do you get people to think about that more or have that conversation?
Unfortunately, many people come to think about it on their deathbed. The research about what people regret or what people wish they had done differently when they are about to die is basically mostly about relationships. I work too much and I didn't spend enough time with my children is the number one for men. I didn't do enough of what I really wanted to do. I didn't trust my gut and I did what was expected of me more than what I really wanted. I didn't spend enough time with my friends and I didn't cultivate my relationships enough. I mean,
this is men and women saying
men
these
and
things.
women. The one that is specifically about men is work.
Okay, they work too much.
They all work too much.
Right.
It's just a plague. They all work too much.
Can we talk about that a little bit? It's interesting you say that. I mean, Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon, talks about his regret minimization theory, and that's why he went and did Amazon, because he was in Wall Street in one of the firms there, and he thought, if I'm going to be at the end of my life, I need to go do things and take those risks, and he always talks about that. But we've heard this time and time again, people on their deathbed, it's not how much they wanted to work, it's the people and the relationships. And with men, I heard an interview you're doing recently with Jordan, I believe, and you were talking about how as men, and I'm one of those too, that's probably why I'm asking you this is my therapy session, there's so much pressure and judged on what we've done in our work and all of these pieces, and the ritual of becoming a man, and is that something that you see as one of those pieces where you're like, wait a second, this is a fascist, or this is something that's really out of whack?
But it's an out of whack that has already changed quite a bit. Probably the most important change for modern man is the invention of fatherhood. Fatherhood that is no longer solely defined by being a provider and by the materiality, but fatherhood in which you can become an emotional unit, a father that has an emotional relationship with his children, fathers that spend way more time with their children than any of the generations before. So I think that there has been a major shift, which is that if people worked a lot before, and because they had to, that's a different story, versus those who want to. But in the past, they probably didn't experience the same kind of conflict, because it's not like they wanted to be home with their children and they were working, and then they were justifying their working because after all they're doing it for their children, but they will not see those children enough while they're doing all of this stuff for them. Yeah, that kind of...
The 50s Mad Men mentality.
Yes.
Okay.
So now you have more conflict about it, which is why you have men of all kinds trying to find other ways to work without having to forego their entire personal life, family life, emotional life, and relationship with their children and partners, men partners, female partners. So I think there's already a big change. Okay. But I do, as a child of survivors, I will say, one of the most important books I read at 15 or so was The Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, a book that for a while has been forgotten and has now been brought back even by Business Week in its research on happiness. It's like the man won't die because the man actually said something that is essential, which is that we are creatures of meaning, and that ultimately what will make us feel good is meaning. And one of the things that gives us meaning is our accomplishments, our achievements, our legacies. But the other register of what makes us feel meaningful is what we represent for others. It's how others carry us inside of them. After all, that's why the legacy will last, because somebody will remember what I did. I can have done lots of things, but if you don't remember it, it will no longer exist after I go. So we need others. We are creatures of meaning. We are also wired for connection. So we want others to matter to us, and we want to feel that we matter to them. It's what allows us to move around in the world. I can walk around freely in the world because I know that there are people all over the world that are thinking of me, holding me inside of them, and I do the same, so that I am alone and never fully alone. It's a both end, because on the one hand we are really alone, and on the other hand we're not really alone. And it's that thing that makes me say that the quality of our life depends on the quality of our relationships, because the relationships give you both the connection and the meaning. The meaning not just of the connection itself, but of everything else you will have done. If no one knows about it, has it really happened? Yes, I can do a lot of things by myself and for myself. But does it exist differently if others know about it, share it, distribute it, create a legacy?
Right. So as men, we're changing. I think about these things all the time. I think about the work and the family and the trade-off. So we're obviously changing than, say, Don Draper 60 years ago, when maybe it was all about work, and he would tell the woman that I'm doing it for you, and maybe he was actually just about the work. I still hear that. Right.
Whenever you talk with men who work very hard, who work in, I spend a lot of time with entrepreneurs and tech people, but also with finance people, and the sense of responsibility is there if they have a family. If they not have a family, it's a different thing. I don't just do this for me. I do this to give something to my family, to my children. But it's a paradox, is that my doing for others is predicated on my not being there with them. And in the past, the role was set. That rigidity was in place. I don't even have a choice of asking, do I really want to do that? Is this the only way to live? There are more choices, and more men are saying, is this the way I want to go about it? You know, maybe when I sit with a couple, a major change, for example, is it by definition, when there is one partner who may not continue to work outside of the house, is it always the woman? Is it going to still be divided by gender, or will it be divided by competence? Maybe, and I'm talking about a heterosexual couple, but because among homosexual couples, it's a much more egalitarian negotiation. Which one among the two of us is the better person to provide materially, and which one has a value addition that is not financial, as in making money, but that is in every other aspect of value addition? And then we are partners in a home economy. In the heterosexual frame, until now, only the woman had the freedom to even ask the question. For the first time, maybe she actually would rather work outside of the house and know that she can do it because the family is really well taken care of by a male partner who is very happy for a while to do that. And maybe as we go along, it won't be an either or. There'll be a period where one person does it and the other one takes care of other aspects of the life. And it switches because we just live long enough that we can have a few roles in our life. We no longer are just going to do one role and die 6 years after we are done raising our children, which is what was happening 100 years ago.
Right. You've said that the lives of women aren't really going to change until the lives of men change, which is a really bold statement. And then to actually think about it that way, what do you mean by that?
Look, we have about, 60 years now of women's movement and major changes pertaining to women, and we are way not done. And there's still so much to do. But I do think that in our interaction with men, the life of women will not change until men also get to go through their revolution and their men's movement. And the questioning of the main values attributed to men, the identity structures that are available for men, the relational structures that are available for men. I mean, women have had a space in which to question some of these things way more than men. And I think that men deserve it. It's necessary. And it's what will allow women to make more changes. It will allow a greater fluidity in general. And if everything in our economy is about flexibility and fluidity and then optimization and everything, I believe that the same thing needs to happen in the relational space. And men have not been given that permission. I mean, you know, there are some countries that will give you paternity leave, and there are some countries that will understand that, you know, men deserve more than 2 days away, or that men don't have to prove that they're really committed to the job because they come back 2 days after the kid is born, you know, because if he stays home, then he's less of a man and less of a high productivity guy, and it's all of that. And those are the permissions that have not been given yet to men.
What about the tension? It feels like if the men have all this tension over here, of course it's going to affect everyone else in the world. And we're busy pushing each other to prove each other that we're men, and we're busy always asking each other, what have you been productive, and what have you produced, and what is the market cap of your company, and how are we going to make those changes?
Look, we are born women and we become men. There is not a single culture where women have to go to the bush and to the woods in order to prove her femininity. This is across civilizations, whereas boys have to continuously prove that they are not women and that they are real men. There is no real woman. And maybe it has to do with our ability to have children, and therefore there is just a given fact. Until now, that's the one thing that it's part of our nature, our biology, and so we don't have to prove that. But I think it's even chromosomally. We start XX, and then we become XY. And so men are continuously having to prove that they are men. whatever the concept of man will be in the particular culture in which they live. What are the attributes of what it is like to be a man? Generally, it goes with fearlessness, competitiveness, self-sufficiency, things that ultimately have made men often quite lonely, even if it's lonely at the bottom or lonely at the top, lonely. The place where they probably are the least lonely is in the military. Because in the military, men are allowed to care for each other, they have to care for each other, they're allowed to weep for each other, they're allowed to die for each other, they're allowed to have love for each other, and maybe sports next. And they're allowed to touch each other. In sports, they're even allowed to touch each other without having to fear, their homosexual panic. So
you really see through the matrix, don't you, Esther?
Seriously, the business world is the opposite of the military. In the business world, everybody has to climb above the other. In the military, everyone understood that the strength of the pack or the team, the sports, it's the same. The two places where the strength of the pack, where male bonding is normative rather than a byproduct or a threat.
How are we going to fix this? This doesn't sound like we're going in the right place.
But I think that the younger generation is a different story. So, for example, I just spent a couple more days with a group of millennial entrepreneurs. And they were describing to me brotherhoods, peer groups, where they come together every Monday for 4 years. They meet to discuss life, self-led, only men, so they don't have to deal with all the impressing anybody. And I think a lot of it is because the millennial generation are the children of the divorced and the disillusioned. But let's just go, which means that a vast number of them grew up with single mothers. And they are much more fluent in the language of emotions than the boomer generation and the traditional generation. And so they talk in ways that my generation and the men of my generation definitely didn't speak. You can feel it. They're at ease with it. They're looking for it. They want a place for authentic communication, authentic connection with other men that isn't about numbers, that isn't about outdoing, that isn't about pretending that everything is great when you are not sleeping because you're losing money every night and you're like awake and you can't say it because then they won't do business with you because you constantly grapple with shame. Shame is the big, big, big dark spot of men. Guilt is more for women, but shame is for men.
So we're all going to die out, is what you're telling me.
No, I think we have a whole generation that is basically saying there's another way to live.
Right.
I don't want to do what my father did. I don't want to be like my grandfather. I want to do it differently. I want to continue my relationships. I don't want to become a partner in an intimate couple and then lose all my friendships, which is what used to happen, and have my wife be the Minister of Social Affairs, or these kinds of breakdowns, which should have less in gay couples. I mean, two men together, are not bound by the traditional structures, But I think the younger generation is introducing a host of gatherings, of bringing back connection, authentic communication, safe spaces to actually get support and not to have to perform masculinity and perform manhood, but just be the person I am and get mentored from it without fearing that any show of weakness is a slope down on my masculine, treadmill.
This is all taking me back to my upbringing when you say things like that. Is there embracing of technology which ultimately connects people? Does that facilitate that movement or that net new idea? Does the tech help in that sense?
Yes.
I think so.
The tech helps absolutely, and nothing will match face to face. Something about us, we are embodied people and we want touch, and we don't want virtual touch only, and we want eyes that take us in. Eyes, it's like the same eyes, that gaze. It's the foundational gaze. And I think so Online we can communicate fast, it's immediate, I can reach across the globe, it breaks down the geographic boundaries. I mean, it's unique, but it's a both end. I don't think that one will replace the other. I think that people will online quickly book their tickets so that they can fly somewhere else in order to meet someone in person.
Right. Let's talk about relationships.
What have we done so far?
I know, that's true. All right, let's talk about amorous relationships, because that can mean a lot of things. Your first TED Talk, which is amazing, The Secret to Desire in a Long-Term Relationship, you started off with the question, can we want what we already have? And you spoke about, again, another one of these paradoxes of the pressures, the assumptions that are involved with a traditional long-term relationship. Where did those ideas come from? And again, how did you, because you seem to really look in and find out these pieces that are really in conflict with each other, but to us would just look like normal marriage.
So this is a good example of where I was confronted with a set of assumptions. And at one point I began to think, maybe these are in fact exactly that, assumptions. They're not truths and facts, such as that when we love, we desire. That greater intimacy begets sexuality, always. It's the always that mattered. That security and adventure in a relationship, they go hand in hand. That if you have sexual problems, it is the consequence of relationship problems. Hence, if you fix the relationship, the sex will follow. And I am still very much a practicing psychotherapist, working with couples and coach, and I saw many couples improve a great deal in every area of their relationship, but it didn't necessarily change what was going on in the bedroom. So I began to think, maybe it's not so simple. To talk about people who don't like each other and lose their sexual and erotic connection is kind of obvious. What's to write? What I was interested in is all these people who come to see me and they say, we love each other very much and we have no sex. I know he loves me very much or she loves me very much, and it's been years since I felt wanted. And they knew the difference. And I began to think love and desire, they relate and maybe they also conflict. Let me go explore that. Why is it that people who continue to love each other as much as ever will also sometimes lose the very erotic connection that brought them into being? Why is it that good intimacy does not always guarantee good sex? In fact, quite the opposite. There seems to be a puzzling inverse correlation where greater intimacy sometimes leads to decreased desire, because what nurtures love isn't necessarily what fuels desire and may even be paradoxical. And can we love what we already have? Because in the romantic ideal, it's all about I have my partner and I am the one and I am the chosen one. And so what does it mean when your partner is actually only on loan with an option to renew and doesn't belong to you? And what would it be like if we actually say, no, I don't have what I already want. Actually, we never have it. Hence, if we can live with that, we probably will want it more. That's the idea of this notion. It's an illusion to think that we have and then to complain of boredom. No, you don't have. In fact, your partner can leave any moment, from death, from illness, from falling in love somewhere else, from any other reason. And if you live with that, which is a certain anxiety that we don't want to have these days, because we have enough unknown and enough anxiety in our business lives and everywhere else. So our partner should just become a piece of furniture on which we can reliably sit and it will always receive us in the same way. Not true.
And so then how do you continue desire then when you have a long-term relationship?
But I think one element is this. Once you understand that this partner that's next to you, which you think you know so well, like the inside of your pocket, for which you sometimes think you can answer their questions, and all of that, if you actually are able to accept otherness right next to you, if you know that the persistent mystery of your partner is right there, if you know that they're not for granted, that they actually could leave at any moment, you make an effort. You make a different effort. You make the effort that you make with your clients. You make an effort that you make with all your business partners, because they wouldn't take this stuff and because you never take those for granted. It's a very interesting thing. I often say to the people I work with, treat your partner the way you treat your client, with the same charm, the same seductiveness, the same humor, the same kindness, and you will have a great marriage. But you no longer do that. It's as if you do it when you're not sure that you have the client yet. And since a client can always leave you, if they get better service somewhere else, then you continue to be on your best behavior. But many of us are on our best behavior at work, and we bring the leftovers home.
You made a great point in your TED Talk where you said when you're looking at your partner very close, it's hard to get that, that desire. But when you're doing it kind of at an arm's length, where you're watching them do something well or watching them interact with others, you can kind of rekindle the mystery about them. Did I understand that right?
See, I was always saying that desire needs space.
That's an interesting concept.
Yes. Desire needs space, difference, otherness, a bridge to cross, somebody to conquer, to bring toward you, a tension, that. But I could never concretize it, like it's an abstract concept. So I began to ask people in 22 countries, when do you find yourself most drawn to your partner? Not just sexually attracted, drawn to your partner. And I began to listen to the answers. This took a few years of my asking this. In Turkey, in Argentina, in Israel, in Brussels, in Paris, in New York, And then I began to see that a certain group of answers would appear each time. A whole set of answers had to do with when my partner is on stage, when he's passionate about things, when she's competent, when they're thriving, when they are radiant, was really the word that would, the word isn't used, but that's what it represented. Their radiance can be because they are good at something, because they're in their element, because they're being admired. Admiration is the piece here, more than respect. And all of these were when I actually, involve otherness. When I look at my partner doing the things that they are so good at, if my partner is at the piano, I'm not sitting next to them. If they're on stage, I'm not next to them. The only one that is gender specific is when he plays with the children. There is no female version of that. Nobody thinks it's sexy if she plays with the kids.
No?
Okay? No, because it's... So when I see my partner in their uniqueness, in their specificity, in their element, by definition invites a perspective and an ability to see their otherness. When we are away, that was group number 2. When we are away, when I'm away, when he's away, when she's away, when we reunite, always brought the notion that desire is rooted in absence and in longing. When she makes me laugh, when he's dressed a certain way, when I see him vulnerable, when I see her vulnerable, which means that they usually are not. It's always elements of surprise, of novelty, of unexpected, of the unknown in the midst.
So a couple listening right now, can they engineer those things to happen? Can they put themselves in situations where they see that in each other
At any moment. At any moment. But you have to be comfortable. If when you say, if I know your radiance, for example, is you're going to the studio to interview me. And when you are interviewing your people, now, if you leave...
She's watching right now.
And I say to you, have a fabulous time. You're going to be great. You're at your best there. I am talking about you. I am completely not in it with you. I'm just admiring, cherishing you, adoring it, encouraging you. But it's a separate you. If when you say I'm going to the studio and I say, again? Why? Twice a week now you're going to do it? You didn't have enough when you were just doing one? You really don't want to be here, isn't it? You would rather be with all these people than with me, isn't it? It's a very different departure. And a different relationship and a different tension. Because the person who leaves with somebody who says to them, go for it, have a fabulous time, enjoy, goes, experiences the erotic, as in they feel alive, they're in their passion, they're doing the thing they want to do. Here you are doing this thing that's your new endeavor, and you're really excited about it, and then you want to go home and talk about it. But the person who leaves because somebody just said, you're abandoning me again, You know, obviously everything is more interesting than me. Why am I not enough for you? And all of that isn't really eager to come home afterwards because it starts to feel suffocating.
So you can actually engineer your own happiness by encouraging your mate to go do these things and be the best them, because you know you'll be attracted to that.
And they will be attracted back to you. Who doesn't
To watch
wanna
the rest of this fascinating interview, click on the link below and go to londonrealacademy.com. There you can sign in with your social media, log in and watch the rest of the episode for free, along with all of our episodes on London Real, my webinars, and all of our premium content, all located over at londonrealacademy.com. So click on the link below, you'll be directed there and you can watch the rest of this fascinating interview, and I'll see you there.
We want to break out.
There's another point you made in that talk, and that was how it used to be a coach that would combine all of these relationships that we have to grow with. And these days, to a certain extent, it's that important. We expect so many things from many